Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clean Call for Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. May the 4th be with you. So Devrati actually was going to be our facilitator today, but she got her second dose of the vaccine and is not feeling super well today. So I'm gonna take the first half, and then I actually have to log off for a bit at 11:30. So Patrick's gonna jump on at 11:25 and be able to take the second half. But we're just having an informal discussion today, so I'm assuming we usually have plenty to talk about. So I'm assuming we can all kind of pitch in and help out as well in terms of making sure we have enough to talk about, or not if we don't. So hello everyone. Do we want to do, I feel like most of the folks seem pretty familiar today, so maybe we can just do introductions in the chat to remind everybody of who's here rather than going around the room. But let me know if you would rather kind of do introductions. Frank put something in the chat and I will open it up. So yeah, please put your introductions into the chat and let us know if you have any announcements that anybody wants to bring up here.
Hello all, this is Frank. There is a international ACE expert conversation happening tomorrow. For those of us who are in non-Eastern time United States, it's going to be super early. It starts at 8 o'clock Eastern AM tomorrow morning. So I'll find the link to it, but it's an expert discussion for ACE International. And I think Deb Morrison is going to be one of the breakout group facilitators. And I think a couple of other people that you may know, but if you're interested in that, I'll put the link to it. I'll find it and then let you know. Sorry, Emily, you might want to be there, but that's going to be super early. So
5 a.m.
Yeah, what's 5 a.m.?
I was just going to say that's especially early for Deb.
That's not actually. So, unfortunately, well, the funny part about it is that because I'm a facilitator for it, I actually have to log on at 4:30. That's pushing my envelope to be like dressed and ready to go at 4:30.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm sure you have things that early, but facilitating is a different, like being on that much to facilitate is always extra burden.
Yeah.
Hey, I hear that facilitating while nude is quite the thing.
Quite the wake up call.
No.
So just for those who just joined us, please, I think most of the folks are pretty familiar today. So please put your introductions in the chat and let us know if you have any announcements. Frank just made one about the event tomorrow. That's what we were just talking about. So anyone else have any announcements to start?
I can go ahead, Katie, if that's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jim.
Hi, Katie. So noting that starting next week, there is the STEM video showcase for all. The videos get released next Tuesday and then run for a week. Updating on that is there are 286 videos. They are seen all over the world. They do get about 50,000 people come in to see the videos. And climate has been featured in the STEM video conference before, but we want to make sure clean is well represented, and I think there'll be a change on it. That'll be much stronger about things. It's also overwhelmingly the videos are from programs that are primarily NSF funded. So, and what we should know is the organizers have been very inviting to us. They've been glad to hear. So they're very happy to see a NOAA primarily funded program as in clean. And so, I mean, that's a real strength that's there. They want to broaden out. They've been very supportive of that. So I think that could be happening. And by the way, I was looking if Jen would be here because cross-promoting other programs, I think Wild Center was going to do a video. Certainly, I want to be looking to see. We'll do everything we can to draw people to those videos as well. And with 286 videos, we want to make sure people notice the clean video. So I think that's where things are.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That was going to be my announcement too. And so I will just put an extra plug in for Jim, has made a really nice video that highlights Clean and kind of how it's helped the mobile climate education programs to stay virtual and engage with students this year. And it really has a nice highlight of Clean. So we really appreciate him putting that together. And yeah, we're going to be boosting that out there and trying to market it. So we'll be on social media. I'll send an announcement out to the Clean Network as well with the link. So please help us share that around. And I agree, if anyone else is also doing this STEM for All video showcase, let us know through Clean, and we can all help cross promote and repost and share things through social media and things like that. So thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Actually, I'm going to run one thing I was meant to say about this is one of the things that I get from the conversations of it. I mean, the video is hitting all the buttons on STEM, on social justice and diversity, on COVID, but also that Clean is a very popular program with teachers and students and the public, and that's being used. And they're bringing out that a lot of these other videos are having trouble promoting that they're actually being used and being seen because of COVID. But yet there are programs like ours that have used Clean very steadily on things. So just know we should be looking really well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, and we'll talk about that next week on Tuesday too. I'm sure we'll make an announcement with the actual link to things because they won't release it till that day. So great. Any other announcements folks want to make?
Katie, I put a note in the chat. I wasn't sure if I did announce the Washington State legislative funding or not. I did? Okay, I couldn't remember if I'd mentioned it before, but we're super excited still. So we have both the Climb Time refunding and the pre-service teacher climate funding.
Woo, congratulations. And always doesn't hurt to announce things multiple times. We get different folks on the call and such. So I will make a plug for some folks, including myself, but also Climate Generation and the Wild Center. I've been mentioning this to Clean, and I think I mentioned it last week too, but just put the link in the chat in case anyone knows any teachers that might be interested in a great professional development summer institute, virtual this summer, and nice regional cohorts trying to keep it teachers supported throughout the school year and bringing them, more localized place-based information. So spread the word about that. Any other announcements?
I have one other one. So I just put the link for the general STEM teaching tools collection in the chat. There are quite a few newer tools coming out right now. We're clearing our backlog right now of tools related to climate change. So there's a number of them. They'll either be named as climate change or environmental justice or learning. So look in the higher numbers like the 60s and 70s. And I specifically wanted to call out the new brief STEM Teaching Tool 71 because it is the backbone of work that's going on in the Access Project. And the Access Project is the one with all 50 states and the territories for coherent, it's like advancing coherent and equitable systems of science education. And so we're using this framework of equity and justice across all of the areas. And many of the people in that network are starting to think deeply and have bills coming down about climate change education. And so this framework will be applied to it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Deb. Any other announcements?
I just have one, but it's really like asking for prayers or something like that. But here in California, we were seeking about 80 letters of support for a trailer bill that would fund the creation of climate change and environmental justice units, similar to our EEI curriculum of about 10 or 15 years ago or so. And we just had overwhelming support. We're up to like 190 letters of support for this. And it also requires school districts in their local control and accountability plans to include climate change and environmental literacy within their district's plan for how to use the major chunk of state funding that they get. So it hasn't happened yet, but the support was really, really overwhelming and exciting. So keep California in your thoughts.
Amy, when will you guys, when's the decision supposed to be rendered?
That's a great question. I think soon, I mean, within the next couple of months. This is something for funding that would happen before the end of this fiscal year.
Gotcha. As a Quaker, sometimes holding people in the light is kind of how we do that. I wasn't sure how long to hold you in the light. Didn't want to get you a bad sunburn, but I got you. Sounds like you need to be in the light a long time. Got it.
Cool. We'll keep you guys updated.
And
Nancy, I thought you'd appreciate that.
Indeed.
Maybe
Thank you, Frank.
sometime if that's a subject, either formal or when one of these informal, if you could update us a little bit of what is the funding structure for this program, this one? I mean, there was EEI had a certain funding structure, and how does this one work? Just a question for down the road.
Can I answer that if we get it? I mean, the gist of it is that it's, supposed to be an allocation from the general budget, and then it will go through through San Mateo County Office of Education, and then out to, a team of writers and consultants and community partners and things like that through a really participatory process of including people from across California so that the curriculum is really representative. And the idea is that it focuses on science and NGSS, but that it would have like modules and connections to the other subjects as well. So we'll see how that goes. But we are, using, the Climate Generation Summer Institute and other networks that we have to sort of bring together the pool of people who are already doing amazing work on something like this in California, so that by the time that we're ready to write those units, they're really top notch and not starting from scratch.
Right.
That's great.
And what I could note is that that's much more, that's very encouraging that that's the structure. EEI tried to make it funded through corporations. They basically, everything was sponsored, and the corporations that were the subject of the environmental issues were often the ones who funded it, and they got to decide what was said. That made front page news that the plastic bag industry got to decide the curriculum on plastic bags. So, I mean, we want to learn from that one. That's very encouraging, that not the wolf guarding the hen house type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And Amy, related to that, we're getting pretty close now to having the Climb Time research paper out that will talk about the collaborative design practices that we use, which I can throw that by you as soon as we have the full draft, just to understand that system of collaborative design and networking that we did to be able to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to see that and then talk to you about it, because I think, whether we get it in this funding cycle or a future one, like there's no way 10 Strands is stopping until something like this happens. There's a huge demand for it. So it makes sense to kind of like start thinking about that structure now too, so that we can make sure we have the right people at the table. That's a good idea.
Abby Rusky is down at UC Merced now, and she was really instrumental in getting the Climb Time funding in place. So you might want to, I'll give you her email too.
Cool, thank you.
And Amy, as you know, when we worked together on the 2019, I guess that was, summit down in LA, on one of the things that's always struggled in this work is that some of the expertise, as you well know, for some of the key topics is sitting outside of the state. And, there's a tendency when state level work that goes on to really pull uniquely, almost exclusively from state work. One of the real opportunities we have here is to bring in advanced thinking work through collaborative structures across states, or even sometimes international. So in my new position, as the ACE National Focal Point, I'm supposed to be doing that both across states, but then also internationally as well. So if we can take that posture at the beginning of the idea, I know this is how you guys think, but other people who have more decisional approaches sometimes are less open to that. So I just want to reinforce that idea, because it's really important, because it's how we can go faster with deep work. Super excited. I'd love to have that opportunity. That's the word.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I see a future conversation about how to go about this, because we both want to like draw from what's gone on nationally and internationally and in other states. And then also, as you're like sharing your resources with me, Deb, like think about how we could be helpful for other states that want to do something similar in the future.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I always have you in mind, Amy.
Yep, me too.
Yeah.
When I think California, I think Amy. Just so you understand how you know. So, but if that's, I think, you know, one of the things I alluded to as we built the ACE agenda is this idea of a climate change learning strategy. But we fully understand that learning strategy has to be flexible, not both in national circumstance, but also within state and sub-state circumstance, right? It's a complicated landscape to do this work, but if we have to appreciate, understand it, and work it, given that, instead of fighting it. I especially appreciate your focus on not just what, you know, California is receiving from other states, but also what California could provide to support other states like New Jersey and Kansas and, you know, Texas eventually.
Complex, complicated, but also very, very fruitful, because we have so many different versions and perspectives that get cultivated in these different areas. It ends up being a blessing if we can handle it.
The good news is we're at NOAA, we're having lots of deep conversations with Salesforce to really start giving us AI tools to be able to manage that kind of complexity. Trying to do it all in your head with like Google spreadsheets, not the right tool. I've tried it forever, but there are some more advanced tools that we can bring into this space that are more robust and that will facilitate that working in that complexity much more effectively.
And if I could say, I don't know enough to know how it compares to Salesforce, but I'm also thinking of Taiwan's OpenGov movement and software and their ability to have 10,000 people in a conversation out of which they're able to distill meaningful, actionable policy.
Love to look at that model, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Well, that got a nice little conversation going. I'll just throw it out there one more time. Are there any other announcements that we didn't get to?
I have one if we have time.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I work at the UCAR Center for Science Education in Boulder, Colorado. And I just wanted to let you know, I put it in the chat, a link to the flyer. It's not, the final's not 100% done because the link to apply is not within there yet. That's going to be added this week, but I wanted to get the information out to everyone. We're going to have a field test opportunity for high school teachers for a new week-long teaching box that we've created. It's on clouds, weather, and climate, and it's done in conjunction with Dr. Kevin Grease at the University of Virginia, based on some of his research. So I just wanted to, it's a great opportunity for teachers. We're hoping for five teachers, and they're going to get a $200 stipend for completing it. So it's a great opportunity. And we really want to get a wide scope. We don't want to just be from one state. We want to get it from across the country, just to test out the teaching box and see what we need to update or change so it works for everyone. So if you could spread it, and we'll also put it into the listserv as well. So watch for that when it comes through. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thanks, Emily. All right, any other announcements?
Emily, I'm not seeing, did you put a link in the chat?
Yeah, it's actually attached file. It was up I did it in the middle of the previous conversation, so it might be buried a little bit in there.
Would you mind posting it again?
Yeah, I can do that again. Absolutely.
That'd be super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it.
No worries.
And she said she'll send it out to the listserv too, which always makes it easier for forwarding it out too. So if you do that, Emily, that would be great.
Yeah.
All right, last call. Any other announcements then? Awesome. Well, jump in if you do, but maybe we'll move on to sort of topics. So today was informal discussion. And I don't think we had anything that needed to be discussed on the agenda that I knew about. So please jump in. What do people want to talk about today?
I have something if nobody
I was
else
just gonna say,
has.
Deb, you mentioned some research and then you put a link in the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I actually have something that I think is more timely and like urgent. So I have been with several colleagues around the world in different contexts, like organizationally and culturally, to produce a brief for the ACE work, the ACE meetings that are going on, that series that we put in the chat of the international ACE events. So there's two sort of things to share around that and some thoughts that I would love to have from folks here. So one is that somebody named Alessandro Caprini, great Italian, and some other colleagues wrote a brief around this action for climate empowerment generally, and I can share that in a sec. But it's a difficult thing for people to understand what that program is because it's so pervasive everywhere. And so his brief really helps to understand the breadth of the program and how it might manifest in different places. He gives the example of Austria and Switzerland. But the work that we've done in the US in the last year or two, and that's been sitting on decades worth of work, is way more nuanced and complicated because we have a much more multicultural, multilingual, complicated set of issues to deal with. And so we started thinking, okay, well, how do we name justice in action for climate empowerment work? And so we've been working on a brief around that. So anyway, I thought I would share that idea, and I'll share the Caprini brief with you in a second. The justice brief hopefully will be finalized by tomorrow, but if not, it will be finalized by the 19th informal consultation meeting. And it is, I'm just curious what people think of, like what comes to mind first as you think about the work you're already doing and how you want to see justice you already do, see justice sort of manifested in it. And I'm not going to define justice because intentionally I want to keep it open so people can think about it. Anyway, that would be a question I'd throw on the table, but I always ask those questions.
I got a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to stay quiet and let others speak first.
Any other thoughts for Deb? I know sometimes it takes a minute to process and respond, but if you have other agenda items you'd like to throw out there as well, feel free. But I think that'd be a great thing to talk about, Deb. So yeah, I'd like to hear people's thoughts as well.
Might I suggest maybe, since it's such an important question, that we have maybe 2 minutes of just quiet to think about, maybe take our own notes and so forth.
Now, and I think the question to make it simple is like, how does justice show up, or should justice show up in your work?
Jim, you have your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I wanted to respect the 2 minutes, however, but if that's where we are, there are so many. I think I know this group, we all believe that there are so many things that be done. There is, we can give examples and need to, and hopefully have some positive examples of, in other words, something that we're not just saying, well, wouldn't it be important that we do this, but gee, nobody's doing it. There's nothing along that line. One area that has been important to us for quite some time, and I think we have good examples that's showing up in the STEM video showcase video, is having people of color be recognized as important educators, being respected, given support, being that's important what they do, and let them speak and see what their work is. That's often, and there's so much in systemic racism in society that prevents that from happening. I mean, one is often educators aren't recognized unless they have a PhD or a master's degree or even credentialed. That people who take the time to be out in the community is not as important as being in the university. Now, of course, this is not a matter of university professors aren't important and teachers aren't important. No, that's not the question. But how do we get to diversity and how do we recognize that? And there's just the one of it is just so regular, our experience, that when you have people of color be teachers, it isn't that this is all that's required, but when there are people who are people of color, that helps to break down the barriers so quickly that kids come and families come when they see people who look like them. And or maybe the other point is when you don't do that, it tends to send the signal, well, STEM education, climate education, geosciences, this isn't for you because nobody's in it now, right? So anyway, just that being one factor of recognizing and giving voices to people. So 1 of 100, but one subject. Thank you.
Emily, I saw your name or your hand there.
Thank you. I wanted to say one thing that's working and one thing that's really not working. So what's working at the moment is trying to figure out language and media formats to broaden the participation at the local level, making sure that things are, or at least trying to figure out which languages and which platforms the communities are already using to be inclusive. And then a bottleneck is that a lot of this work is being done by volunteers. And a lot of the people who want to participate really can't through a volunteer basis. And that until we have salaries for people to be included, I think that drives some of those inequities just mechanistically.
Frank, your hand is raised.
Sure. So I think one of the important dimensions of the question I wanted to explore is obviously justice is a critical piece of our work now. But I think also justice and the call for justice to be inside how we address the climate crisis is also true that there are other intersectional issues in addition to justice. We have a shift towards authoritarianism. We have a workforce crisis. We have a pandemic. We have economic inequality. We have indigenous oppression, and we have, racial systemic racism. All of them together, as long as we're looking at the justice dimension within the context of a wider intersectional frame, I think that also adds some unique attributes of how the United States is going to have to deal with these convergence of crises. And so when you have a convergence, you have to come up with strategies that deal with solving them simultaneously. As they say at Climate Interactive, multi-solving. You're not doing one thing and getting co-benefits. You're solving multiple crises with one or a series of focused interventions that work them together because they are crises in common. So that for me, that's just a really important nuanced approach. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm reading. That's how I see it being done. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Frank. And I'll mention Wendy put a comment in the chat. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the call, but not everybody was on yet. I actually have to get going. Patrick was supposed to sign on and I don't see him yet. So I'm gonna, if somebody wouldn't mind just being willing to be the host. Thanks,
Yeah,
Deb.
throw it at
I'm
me,
just-
Katie. Yeah.
Thanks. All right. And great conversation. Continue, please. I just have a full day. And so I need to get going. But thank you all so much. And I will see you all soon.
Bye.
Deb, do you want me to facilitate? That way I'll shut up.
Oh, you can totally facilitate. I just will take the host offer. So thanks.
That's fine.
Okay,
Happy to do
great.
it.
That'd be great. Thank you. Wendy, do you
So
want
I'm
to
just
talk
going.
to your point, maybe? Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to jump in after Frank's comment. So one of the things I think we deal with when you put it all together is to try and give people more of a meta view. And I think a meta view is that we don't just look at the pandemic separately or extinction separately or racial justice separately or all those things, but to consider about how we are as a species on the planet. And so we are a global species and we're messing up. And one of the ways I've been thinking about presenting this is that we have a global species test. You know, how are we doing on the global species test? And the answer clearly right now is that we're failing. And what would it take for us to pass the global species test? What kind of actions? And that would put a lot of these things into one bigger framework.
Mhm. There's a lot
Thank
of
you,
work
Art.
in education art coming out around that now, around like ecological caring or ecological reasoning, or just a lot of different pieces around that have been really helpful.
This, Frank, I see your hand just came up. You want to take yourself off mute? There you are.
There we go. So, Frank, I'm glad you brought up the question of authoritarianism. This question of justice, I've kind of struggling with it a little bit after having spent the past week and a half at a climate reality leaders training. And they really push the envelope or push the direction very much to including communities of color and traditionally disenfranchised communities. And it all felt good, but it all felt like everybody going to one side of the boat and the boat getting ready to capsize. Because the other part of it was, I didn't hear anything about the people who traditionally support the authoritarians. I didn't hear anything about the farmers, the ranchers, the union folks. And it's somehow, I really struggle with the idea that of how do we raise the voices that have been traditionally kept out of the conversation without throwing out other voices who then become victims. Yeah, anyway, I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Frank. I don't see any other hands. If
Frank,
Nancy.
mine's up.
oh, all right, go for it.
First, let me pick up on what Frank Grenshaw just said, and I'm thinking in particular of the Poor People's March or Poor People's Campaign as really, I think, framing the issues in a far more genuinely inclusive way across the things that otherwise separate us, and being very explicit about resisting the divide and conquer manipulation of the public will that is handicapping much of what we're doing. So I'm really glad you raised that, Frank. The other point I wanted to make when I think specifically about justice and equity is the challenge. It's really important to comprehend that as a touchstone for identifying the failures of community and voice that we struggle with. but at the same time, it can reinforce the notions of scarcity and a focus on somehow making up for what has gone wrong. And important as those things are, it is equally important to be framing, maybe this is a beyond justice question or a fulfillment of it, but the notion of agency and how it's promoted. And I'm looking at the work of Amartya Sen and Hannah Arendt, Caesar McDowell on voice, even John Rawls, but the power, I think, in the ACE framework is this embracing of the notion of fulfillment of our capacity to shape our lives and support each other in doing that. There is a story I may have mentioned. If I've told you this before, just tell me, but it comes out of blanking, Malidoma Patrice Somme's book of Water and the Spirit, where he tells of the tradition of his people in Burkina Faso, the Dagara, that when the infant quickens in the mother's womb, the elders come and confer with that infant and they say, what is it that, why are the ancestors sending you to us at this time? What are the particular gifts that you are bringing into the village, into the people that we need? And then the child is named on that basis. And as he puts it, it then becomes the work of the whole village to help that person fulfill what they came for. And conversely, their fulfillment to make their particular contributions. So I think having, if you will, a positive image of the fullness and fulfillment of each person. And from that perspective of wholeness, then look again at what are the things that get in the way of that happening and what are the things that nurture it. And then that becomes, if you will, our guiding ideal for our society with a particular relevance to education.
Thank you, Nancy. Do we have any other, I'm using my phone now because my computer's updating. So it's because I'm going back and forth and looking at the chat and the participants. So if you have a hand or you have a point, just feel free to speak forward. I don't see any hands at the moment.
Maybe I'll just speak back to a couple of things. So Frank G, I think it's a really interesting thing that we have to address. And it's kind of, as we unpack the word empowerment, it gets at what Nancy's talking about too, around agency and voice and all those things. But of course, like living in North America as a white woman, my understanding of what agency is radically different than even living in North America as an Indigenous woman. And so like understanding, and that's going to be incredibly different than perhaps living as an Indigenous person in the Brazilian rainforest. And so like understanding what those different contexts, political and social contexts are, that and that empowerment itself is not at the individual only. It's an interaction with the individual, the community, the political, the like broad social context. And it is defined back and forth, just like identity is defined. It's defined iteratively back and forth. And so I think also something that we have to get clearer about is when we talk about climate justice and empowerment, we actually have to have a clear understanding collectively of what empowerment means. So we're trying to get at that a little bit too. And there's a whole bunch of justice related to empowerment, because like the dictator thing, Frank, like, okay, if I'm living in a radically oppressive regime, then that is going to be a wildly different understanding of how I exercise empowerment than if I live, you know, as me in my current context, you know. In this area where I live 50 years ago, it was a radically oppressive regime if I was Indigenous, you know, and it still is in certain ways. And so like trying to figure that out and work that through so that we're like, can we have climate justice if we don't have some kind of social justice along with it? That's a big question going on. By the way, I'm totally distracted by Patrick Handler's background. That's Patrick.
Let's go Emily and then Jim. And if you have questions, please raise your hand.
Okay, so I'm glad you guys brought up agency, and particularly thanks for collective agency and how you represent it, because it is going to look really super duper different in lots of areas. And when people think of collective action, one of the things that I'm seeing so far for like just the beginning of the prototyping that I'm doing is that people are falling back on protest images. And so helping to pull forward some of the alternatives to that so that we have constructive collective images sets that are representative of what's actually going on, as you said, Deb, in different contexts, because it's going to be really different in different places for different communities, is one of the things that I'm trying to figure out. So if you have specific examples of that, or you just want to continue the conversation in the long run, that's one of the things that I'm working on.
Thank you, Emily. Jim?
Yeah, thank you. I want to hesitate on thank you for the time and saying again. Let's see, another whole kind of part of my life is something that gets kind of overwhelming, and trying to balance in this balance, because climate education to me is a very hopeful thing. Working with kids is so it just feels good, and you're doing things. There's another side of working in California and in the Bay Area where climate justice and ethnic justice and social justice are so clearly intertwined. I mean, it is so deep and so heavy, and sometimes it can be very depressing because you're working with cities that have a reputation of being progressive, and then just going along with really outrageous things. And I guess there's just that thing of maybe among educators us having some way of connecting and deal with it. It's not something I think Clean can really get into a lot, but in the Bay Area, for instance, we have very wealthy areas, and they have one set of standards. They have trees, they have energy, all kinds of wonderful things come in. There are all these different climate action plans in the cities, which often are just paper. There's one thing on paper. We have all these plans, and then we do something different. And yet there's cities that are doing good things. So it's a mix. But then among the ones I have the good fortune to work with many environmental organizations in the Bay Area, which are led by African American and Latino people of color, right, Asian people too. And how often they're absolutely being crushed and suppressed and being knocked out, and then decisions are made where lies are made. And the general feeling of different people, different communities of color, understanding the need to work together. I mean, people often wonder, well, I'm a white man. Is it uncomfortable to talk with African American organizations? And no, I mean, the idea that people who are black don't care about the environment and the climate change, I mean, that itself is such a racist idea that's very pervasive, and don't see that. But I see organizations I've worked with for years actually get just completely crushed and then is ignored. And there's a thing on our state level of, as a state, we're doing good things, but we have to address this, that there is tremendous inequity. I'm sorry I don't have a clear thing on this, but this is a very alive, real thing. And when you get into it, it just hits you in the face. It's just so strong. So sorry I don't have something clear.
Oh, super helpful.
Thank you, Jim. Where are we in time? So we still got about 16 minutes left. But any other thoughts? I don't see any other hands. Deb, are you finding this is providing you some feedback that you found
it's
needed
really
based on?
Yeah, it's really helpful because it's reminding me about a couple of things that I've forgotten to, that are helpful just to pull together and cinch. And this is, an ongoing effort over the next decade plus, as we try to pull these together. But these key moments like now to be able to influence some of the broader conversation. And even though we know it's kind of, Bettina Love wrote about it recently in her book on we need to do more than just survive. And she talked about the idea of Black joy, that joy is not found in the idea of just happiness, without work. Joy is found in the struggle and doing it collectively. And like, that's what I feel like we do together so often, is like, we're struggling to try and figure out through all of these systemic structural inequities to do the work that we need to do, to empower folks to like radically transform educational context, to actually get climate centered in the world as a conversation. So I greatly appreciate all of the conversation.
Let's go Cheney and then Emily. I haven't heard from Cheney yet.
I mean, I'm pretty new to this group. I guess I just have a big question. This group isn't particularly diverse, and I'm wondering what efforts have been made to bring in and center Indigenous voices, BIPOC, like different ways of knowing. I listened to a podcast a long time ago about being color brave and like figuring out, like making big efforts to figure out ways to diversify and make more diverse voices feel welcomed. And so it's a question to this group of like, what efforts have been made?
So Cheney, if you don't mind, I'll give you a quick response because I want to make sure we have time to get to Emily. You're raising a very important point that is been discussed in our community for a long time. And as we go past our first 10 years into our second 10 years, this is actually a critical priority. And I think there are other related initiatives where we've made tremendous progress, but actually in this network itself, we have a long way to go. So absolutely critical point. And we are actually having a leadership board, but you didn't know there was a clean leadership board visioning session right after this. And so I'm definitely going to be one of the people taking that query to that body so we can make some progress. But yes, absolutely. Great call. Emily, and then I see Laura.
Okay, so again, this is kind of quickish, but wait, no, I forgot what I was going to say.
Do you want me to go to Laura and come back to you? Or you got it?
So as I cross between different disciplines, one of the things that's been interesting to me as we try to like go across siloed areas is that this area tends to really struggle with it, partially because of resource, issues, but not all of the communities are, right? Like I also work in a lot of tech sectors and they don't have these resource problems, right? So like this idea that like somehow there isn't enough resource to go around is I mean, sometimes that narrative kind of loops in this circuit, but like if you step outside that to some of the business spheres or tech spheres, they're like, what do you mean there aren't enough resources? Of course you just hand people salaries and like benefits and then they come in and do work. Like, and so I just, and so I think that as I try to start to do advocacy for this field, I kind of do see those dichotomies, especially living here in the Bay Area. Okay, next person.
Great, thank you, Emily. Let's go Laura, then Tamara.
Yes, what I would like to say is I've been on the job search circuit, applying for climate change education jobs and also other jobs related to climate change. And there is a concerted effort there to hire people who aren't white. All of the job requirements state that they are really looking for biopic indigenous individuals or individuals with disabilities. So even though you might not see it at the level here of the Clean Network, there is at a more grounds level this idea to be more inclusive in climate change education and climate communication.
Thank you, Laura. Tamara?
Okay, I just wanted to follow up on the question by Cheney about what we've done, and then the comments by Frank. This is just a little history. We did try to bring we did try to diversify the leadership board, which probably at some point we should define that for everybody else who's not part of the leadership board, but I won't go there right now. we did try to diversify and bring on people from the indigenous communities and people of color. It was a huge struggle to do that. And then once we got a few people, I think we just didn't meet their needs. And so trying to figure out what it is that would help them benefit from being part of this community is, I think, what this visioning, our visioning conversation needs to address. Because we did, I mean, they just had other things they had to do, and we weren't really providing the community that would help them do it. So that's, I just wanted to put that context, is that it wasn't that we didn't try, it's that we didn't succeed.
Thank you, Tamara. Patrick, do you mind if I go to Patrick, Emily, since we haven't heard from him yet? Patrick?
Hey, y'all. I think part of the visioning process and really tied in with what Tamara said is continually considering asking the question of who we choose to show up for rather than who we invite to show up for us. And that's a question that's tied in with the resources because in order to show up for partners, it takes some resources on our part, whether it's time or funding or whatever. And hopefully we can settle into that question a bit more moving forward. I'd love to consider how we might be better partners to Rising Voices and some of the other groups that are already doing excellent work. And it is that question of what is it that we are giving and really through that.
Thank you, Patrick. Emily, did you still have your hand up?
Yeah, just one real quick specific example. So for like in the journalism communities, there's a really like a big drive to improve, BIPOC, indigenous voices, right? So you'll see journalism scholarships and, programs, right? But on average, each program supports 15 people a year for something like $2,000 stipends. And that's not a salary, and that's too small a group of people. So if we're really looking to improve capacity, I think that, individually working with those kinds of programs, like collaborative journalism definitely has a mechanism for how to do the work. But there is certainly a lot of room to grow.
Thank you. Laura, I see your hand is up now again. Yep, you're still muted. There you go.
One thing to say is for a lot of jobs, or even to get to have interactions with organizations, there's credentials that need to be involved instead of looking at somebody's potential or and be willing to mentor them. And so I think as we move away from credentials and look at possibilities to mentor and to grow a person, then there will be more inclusion.
Hey, Mom, I need my Advil.
It's interesting.
Laura, yeah, you had.
Sorry, it's interesting, Laura, that you say that, because like in many collaborations I've worked on with tribal nations, number one things is shifting the way we learn to include different types of mentorship or apprenticeship programs. And I've thought a lot about that in terms of, like, I have a colleague who works with me who's 20 years younger than me, and theory that we should all be working with somebody 20 years younger than us, like, and they work at 20, and that we're constantly have a group of people who are developing and fostering into this work. And we need to like just ask for that money when we have our own jobs, that we need to actually say that this is a required thing, that we have like a shadow, like who's work with us and sitting in on things, because it builds capacity in that non-credentialed way that is actually critical for, and I'm learning a ton, like it's not a one-way street, right? Like, so, and trying to figure out how to make sure that those mentors are diverse in a number of different ways, so that like I'm influenced heavily by different perspectives. And, so I think that's really important, and that we can all do that in our positions as we sort of like, try to change systems in ways.
And always frame it, always as mutual learning.
Totally.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, mentorship isn't quite the right word.
And I think it is natural to this community to do this. We already are doing this often and repeatedly for lots of diverse reasons through our collaborations. I do that all the time. It is a critical piece of how the community grows. So I think holding that is a really important piece. But I also, it's back to Patrick's point about giving. Being explicit about that giving, like that we can give and we can receive, and that's how we grow as a community as people come in and out for different purposes, different times. But that's wonderful. I recognize that we're 4 minutes out. I don't see any active hands. I finally learned that on the phone, hands get moved to the third slot in the phone. That's like, yay! I figured something out in Zoom. Then I'll change it next week. Any walk? So Deb, did you get a good?
Yeah, thank you all so much for your shared thinking. It's really helpful.
Awesome. It was given, as a gift. So, what? Any walk-on items? Any thoughts that I forgot? Like, ooh, there was that thing that is really important, but I just remembered. Any of that? Laura, you're still muted. There you go.
The link yet about the conference you were talking about tomorrow morning?
I put it. It's in the chat. I did put it there, so it's closer to the top. I imagine. If you can't find it, Laura, Deb, do you have that link? I mean, since you're a facilitator,
I put it right underneath too.
Yeah.
Just let me throw it.
Should be there.
And Laura, broad page is the Action for Climate Empowerment. I'll grab it here.
Activities for 2021.
Yeah.
Something like that. And just to be clear, you must register. I think. So I would register. We've heard in the past you didn't have to. Yeah. Please register. It'll be an interesting conversation. And we'll have the skilled facilitation of Deb Morrison there as well. Who are the other facilitators, Deb? I remember most of them.
So Henry McGee from the UK. What's the climate outreach? Yeah, Satis, Danae. So Satis Cintron Rodriguez from Citizens Climate Lobby. Danae Espinoza from Mexico, and I can't remember what organization she's representing. She's the ECOS focal point right now, one of the ECOS focal points. And then George Marshall is going to be a facilitator. He's from Climate Outreach in the UK.
And if you don't, go ahead, Laura.
Could you send it one more time so I make sure I have the right one? I'm seeing it.
Yeah, okay. Just stuck it at the bottom of the chat.
Yep. So anything else about that? Because Cheney, I see you have a hand. All right, Cheney.
This is just, I guess, a quick request. I'm really kind of in the business of finding student-facing resources, particularly digital resources, and the two big categories, I guess, are in kind of climate or environmental related subtopics. So I guess if you have any interest or of great places for student-facing, super engaging, and different level resources, you could let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. And then I was really inspired talking to Emily about her work around storytelling and focusing around agency and collaboration. And so if you have, and she talked a lot about bright spots. So if you know of bright spots and kind of stories of people doing really great work throughout the country, I would love to figure out a way to curate that for kids and teachers. It's a very kind of weird, broad request, but if that sounds interesting to you, you could email me, and that's it.
Cheney, I would ask that you also send it out to the listserv, because who's on the call, who's able to be on these calls is a narrowing. So I would put those requests out to the Clean Network.
Okay. I'll need one person to tell me how to do that.
Yeah, Patrick, can you throw the email for emailing? Because you're here, so you're getting
Oh.
emails from, so what's it? It's climate@circ or something like that. The email. I don't have access to my computer right now.
Patrick's getting it.
Okay.
I think it's probably Climate Literacy Network at circ.carleton.edu, but Patrick can probably confirm that.
That's it. And I will throw it in the chat here.
And so Cheney, just so you know, one of you got special powers in this community. When you have 700 plus, 780 people in this space, you sometimes the emails just like, you never know when it explodes. But every now and then you have this flurry of wonderful response to a query. So, and for those people who are out there, they call themselves lurkers. Look, Billy Spitzer just showed up. There's the wider asynchronous clean network, and then there's the people who are able to come to these calls. So there's really two communities. So
Thank you.
wonderful. Sure. Well, it looks like we have officially blown the time. I missed my mark by a minute. Thank you all for joining us again for our weekly telecon, and can't believe we've been doing this for every week pretty much since 2008. So it's glad that we continue to do this. There's still value here. So be well all, take care, get vaccinated, please.
Can we stop the recording?
Yep, I think Patrick's got that. Or you do. Then you take over host.
Oh, maybe I have it. Oh, wait.
Yeah, I don't have host.